I shouldn't have told those words to someone like her. Do what you want. I said it like a joke, like I wasn't already watching every small thing she did. But she took a breath, glanced at me once, and somehow that tiny moment has been replaying in my head ever since. It happened on a Thursday, the kind where nothing feels urgent until suddenly it does. I was at the back of the small repair shop, hunched over a laptop that wouldn't stop restarting when the bell over the door chimed. I didn't bother looking up at first. People come in, drop things off, complain about their screens. Routine. Predictable. But her voice wasn't predictable. It was low, steady, a little rough around the edges in a way that made me straighten without thinking. Is there someone who can take a look at this? I turned, and there she was. Not trying to look younger, not pretending anything. Just quietly composed. Confident in that unintentional way people get when they've lived through more than they explain. She held a tablet tucked under one arm, but the way she was tapping her thumb against the side told me it wasn't the only thing on her mind. You can leave it on the counter, I said. My voice came out too light, too quick. I don't know why that embarrassed me. She stepped closer, setting the tablet down with surprising gentleness, like it was something that mattered to her. It's been freezing, she said. Every time I try to open my documents, it locks up. Probably storage, I muttered, pulling it toward me. Or the OS. I can check it. She nodded, but her attention wasn't on the tablet anymore. For a second, a longer second than necessary, her gaze flicked to my hands, then to my face. I pretended to keep working, but my fingers hesitated on the power button. She caught the hesitation. Smiled barely. You look like you want to say something. I didn't. Or maybe I did. I just didn't know what. It might take a bit, I said, clearing my throat. You can come back later if you want. Or wait. Up to you. Her head tilted slightly, like she was trying to understand something I hadn't said out loud. Then she leaned one elbow on the counter. Casual, but sharp enough to make me feel seen. Do what you want, she replied, letting the words fall between us like she knew exactly how they would land. And something flickered. Not romance. Not attraction. Something quieter. A shift in air pressure. A pulse in the room. A feeling I wasn't prepared for. She waited while I examined the device. Not talking, not fidgeting. Just watching in that patient, unreadable way. When I explained the issue, she listened without interrupting, even though most people would have cut me off halfway through. At one point, when I handed the tablet back for a moment, our fingers brushed. Just barely. Just enough that I felt it more than the plastic case itself. She didn't pull away. She didn't acknowledge it either. But her breath hitched, so small I might have imagined it. And then she looked anywhere except at me. Come back in 2 hours, I said, trying to steady my tone. She paused. All right. She reached for the tablet again. But before leaving, she glanced over her shoulder, her expression softer than before. Thoughtful, maybe. Or conflicted. The bell chimed as she walked out, the door closing slower than usual, like even the air didn't want the moment to end. I stood there long after she was gone, staring at the empty doorway. I told her to do whatever she wanted. And now I can't stop thinking about what that meant, or why the way she looked back at me felt like the beginning of something I wasn't ready to name. I didn't expect her to come back early, but she did, stepping into the shop 20 minutes before the time I'd given her. Like something had pushed her here quicker than she planned. She didn't say that, of course. She just stood by the counter with that composed stillness she carried like armor. I was in the area, she said, even though her hair was damp at the ends, like she'd walked through the mist outside. Yeah, I replied, pretending to believe her. I'm almost done. She gave a small nod and looked around the shop, anywhere except at me. The place was quiet, too quiet, with the soft hum of old ceiling fans and the smell of solder that clung to everything. I wiped my hands on a cloth and tried not to stare at the way she rested her fingertips on the counter, tapping lightly, stopping, then starting again. A rhythm that sounded like nerves. You don't have to wait right here, I said. It's fine. She said it quickly, a little too quickly. I turned back to her device, but her presence tugged at me, pulling my attention in small, involuntary glances. She had a book tucked under one arm, a thick, worn paperback, and when she shifted it, I saw a corner of the cover creased like it had been carried around for weeks without being read. You like that one? I asked before thinking. She blinked, surprised. Hmm? Oh, I keep meaning to finish it. Her voice dipped in that last part, softer, a little cracked around the edges. Not sadness, something gentler. Fatigue, maybe. Something she didn't intend to show. She placed the book on the counter, smoothing the cover with her palm. Her hand lingered there, fingers slightly curled, and I found myself studying the small details. The faint indent from a ring long gone. The way her nails were short and practical. The tiny tremor in her index finger like she'd been overworking or undersleeping. You okay? I asked quietly, barely loud enough to hear. She froze for half a breath. Not offended. Not startled. Just unguarded for the first time. I'm fine, she whispered, though she didn't sound convinced. Just a long week. I nodded, pretending to focus on the device again, but I could feel the shift, something in the room loosening. Not between us, exactly. More like inside her. A door she forgot she'd left cracked open. Your tablet should run smoother now, I said, powering it on. She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the faint trace of rain in her hair. You fixed it? Yeah, I murmured. Wasn't too bad. She didn't smile, not fully. Just a tiny lift of her lips that she tried to hide by lowering her gaze. She reached out to take the tablet, and for a moment her hand hovered, unsure, like she wasn't ready for the moment to end. When our fingers touched again, this time she didn't pull away. She just breathed out slowly, like she'd been holding it in for hours. Thank you, she said, her voice quieter than the first time we met. Really? I swallowed. Anytime. She looked at me then. Really looked, and the guardedness was still there, but softer, thinner, like she was tired of carrying it. I'll see you around, she said, stepping back. The bell chimed as she left, but she paused at the door just long enough to glance over her shoulder again. Just long enough for something unspoken to pass between us, something neither of us was ready to name, but both of us felt. And for the rest of the evening, I couldn't stop replaying that last look. The storm had already started by the time she stepped into the shop, not a dramatic one, just steady rain that softened everything outside into a gray blur. Closing time was 10 minutes away. I was half convinced she wouldn't show up again this week. I was wrong. She stood by the doorway for a moment, shaking the water from her sleeves, and when she saw me alone in the dim, mostly closed shop, something in her expression shifted. Not a smile, not relief, more like permission, as if the empty room gave her an excuse she'd been quietly hoping for. Sorry, she said, brushing her damp hair back. I know it's late. It's fine, I said, maybe too fast. You can stay a minute, if you want. Her steps were slow, careful, like she wasn't sure how close she was allowed to get. She set her device on the counter again, though it wasn't broken. The screen lit up perfectly. She didn't explain, and I didn't ask. You're working late, she said, leaning on the counter with one arm, her shoulder only a foot from mine. Storm messed up the power earlier. I'm catching up. She nodded, but her eyes weren't on the laptops or cables. They were on me, on my hands, on the faint scrape on my knuckle from a drop tool. Her gaze lingered long enough that I felt it. You should clean that, she murmured. It's nothing. She didn't argue, but her fingers twitched like she wanted to reach out and check it herself before deciding against it. The restraint made something inside me tighten. We stayed there in the quiet for a moment, just the rain and the low hum of the lights filling the space between us. She glanced at the door once, like she was remembering she shouldn't be here, like she'd promised someone she'd be home earlier. Right then, her phone buzzed. She didn't check it, not immediately. She held it in her hand, her jaw tightening for a second. Then the screen lit up again, a second vibration. A name flashed. Not family, not work. Something that made her shoulders drop the slightest bit. You can take it, I said. No, she set the phone face down. Not right now. Her voice had this softness I hadn't heard before. Exhaustion mixed with something like relief. Or guilt. Hard to tell. I tried focusing on the half-open drawer beneath the counter, but her closeness made it impossible. Her sleeve brushed mine when she shifted. She didn't apologize for it. And she didn't move away. You ever have days where everything feels too loud? She asked suddenly. I looked at her. Her eyes were darker in the dim light, tired around the edges, but open in a way I hadn't seen before. Yeah, I said. More than I admit. She exhaled, a small, quiet sound, almost a confession by itself. She rested both hands on the counter, palms flat, knuckles tense. I realized she was standing close enough that I could feel the faint warmth radiating from her through the cool shop air. Sometimes I think, she began, then stopped. Her throat moved like she swallowed something she didn't want to say. Never mind. What? I asked before I could stop myself. Her gaze flicked to my mouth, then away like she regretted the movement instantly. It's nothing, she whispered. I shouldn't. The phone buzzed again, louder this time. She closed her eyes briefly, not annoyed, not angry, just pulled away by a life that wasn't this moment. I wanted to reach for her hand, just lightly, just enough to ask her to stay. But I didn't. Her eyes opened slowly, and there was something there, something almost fragile. She lifted her hand from the counter, hesitated, and for a second it looked like she was about to place it on mine. She didn't. She let it fall back to her side, breathing out shakily as the rain hit harder against the windows. And the space between us felt like it was one heartbeat away from something neither of us was supposed to want. She came back the next day without an excuse, no device in her hand, no book, no reason that made sense for someone like her. She stood in the doorway long enough for me to realize she was deciding whether to turn around. When she finally stepped inside, the shop felt smaller, quieter, like it was waiting with us. You're here late again, she said. I could say the same. She gave a tired half-laugh, brushing her hair behind her ear. I wasn't planning to come in. But you did. She didn't answer. She walked to the counter and leaned against it, her arms crossed, her shoulders tight. I could see the tension in her jaw, the way her foot tapped once and stopped like she'd caught herself revealing too much. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was thick, a living thing between us. You didn't check your phone yesterday, I said quietly. Her eyes flickered, the smallest flash of something raw. I know. Everything okay? She inhaled slowly, her fingers tightening on her arm. It's complicated. I nodded. I didn't push, but I didn't look away either, and she felt that. I could tell. Her gaze drifted to my face before she looked down like she wasn't allowed to hold eye contact for too long. You shouldn't look at me like that, she said under her breath. How am I looking at you? She closed her eyes, a pained little smile pulling at her mouth. Like you see something I'm trying very hard to hide. I stepped closer, not touching her, not even brushing her sleeve, just close enough for honesty to feel possible. The shop hummed softly around us, fluorescent lights buzzing like they were holding their own breath. You don't have to hide from me, I said. Her eyes opened slowly, softly, like she wasn't expecting gentleness from someone my age. That's the problem, she whispered. There was a long pause. Her lips parted like she wanted to say more, but all that came out was a shaky exhale. She pushed a hand through her hair and let her palm rest on the back of her neck, her fingers trembling slightly. This is getting strange, she finally said. Don't you think? I swallowed. Yeah, I do. And we're pretending it's normal, she continued, her voice dropping. That we're having ordinary conversations. That this is nothing. Is it nothing? I asked. She looked at me sharply, not angry, just startled by the question she'd been avoiding. Her throat worked before she spoke. I don't know what this is. I just know I shouldn't feel anything when I walk through that door. Her honesty hit harder than if she'd touched me. I tried to say something, to reassure her, to tell her she wasn't alone in the confusion, but my voice faltered. The truth got stuck somewhere in my chest. She leaned both hands on the counter, shoulders dropping as if the weight of the moment finally pulled her forward. She stared at the floor, then at my hands, and finally at me. What are we doing? She whispered. Her voice wasn't steady. It wasn't confident. It wasn't guarded. It was scared. Not of me. Of whatever this was turning into. I stepped closer, close enough for her breath to brush my jaw, and she didn't move away. She didn't blink. She didn't pretend. For the first time, she didn't hide anything at all. I don't know, I said, barely audible. Her lips parted, a soft, helpless motion. Then she exhaled one devastating line, so fragile it almost broke between us. I'm afraid to want anything from you, because I don't trust myself to stop. It happened in the kind of quiet that makes every breath feel louder. She came in after closing again, not apologizing this time, not pretending she was just passing by. She just walked in, shut the door behind her, and held herself like someone bracing for news she didn't want to share. I shouldn't be here, she said. But she stayed. I wiped my hands on a cloth even though they were already clean. My pulse had been too quick around her lately, and tonight it felt uneven, like it knew something before I did. She didn't lean on the counter this time. She stood across from me, arms wrapped around herself, eyes unfocused, almost afraid of the space between us. You said yesterday that you were afraid to want something, I said carefully. She nodded once. Tight. I meant it. And you're here anyway. Her breath wavered. That was the first sign. The second was the way she reached into her bag with trembling fingers. I need to show you something, she whispered. And I don't know why I'm choosing you. My chest tightened. She pulled out her phone, unlocked it, then hesitated so long I thought she'd changed her mind. Finally, she opened a saved voicemail and pressed play. Her hand shook as she held the phone between us. A man's voice filled the shop, tired, frustrated, breaking in places it shouldn't. You never talk anymore. I don't know what you want. I don't know if you even want me. Just call me back. She stopped the message halfway through. That was my husband, she said quietly. Ex-husband now. But that voicemail, it was the beginning of the end. I stared at her, not judging, not reacting, just listening. She swallowed hard, eyes glistening but not tearing. I don't tell people this. I don't tell anyone, actually. But hearing you, her voice cracked before she caught it. You ask me if I'm okay. You listen when I talk. He never did. Not even before the split. I didn't speak. My throat felt too tight. Her voice dropped to something softer, more fragile. It wasn't about love. It wasn't even about loyalty. It was about feeling invisible in a room you're physically sitting in. She laughed quietly, bitterly. I didn't even realize how lonely I'd gotten until you looked at me like I wasn't. I stepped closer, slowly, so she could pull away if she wanted. She didn't. It's not your job to make up for what he didn't do, I said. I know that. Her hand pressed against her forehead. But the way you listen, it scares me. Because I remember what it felt like when someone used to. A long time ago. Someone before him. I asked gently. She looked at me then, and something deep in her expression shifted, a memory waking up. Yes, she whispered. Someone I lost. Someone younger than me. My breath stopped. You remind me of him, she said. Not because you look like him, but because you have the same way of seeing people. Noticing the small things. She paused, voice almost breaking. I don't know if that makes this wrong or comforting or both. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. She stepped forward just once. One small, trembling step, and her voice lowered to a confession meant for no one else. When you look at me, I feel like someone I cared about didn't disappear after all, and that terrifies me more than anything. Her hand brushed mine, the lightest touch, barely there, but it felt like the floor shifted under us. And that soft, barely there contact felt like the kind of moment you don't come back from. She didn't come in the next day, or the day after. The shop felt hollow without her, the kind of quiet that isn't peaceful, just missing something. I tried not to notice. Tried not to check the door every time the bell didn't ring. But by the third evening, when the rain started again and the lights flickered with the storm, she finally appeared. No hesitation this time. No pretending she was just nearby. She stepped in, locked the door behind her, and leaned against it like she'd run out of excuses to stay away. I wasn't avoiding you, she said softly. I know, I answered. I did. She wasn't running from me. She was running from what she felt around me. Her breath shook a little as she walked toward the counter. She looked different today. Not put together. Not guarded. Just tired in a way that stripped her down to the truth. I've been thinking about what I told you, she said. About him. About the past. About you. A knot tightened in my chest, but I stayed quiet. She stopped in front of me, closer than she had ever stood before. Close enough that I could see the faint shimmer at the corner of her lashes, the tiny scar on her eyebrow. the way her breathing stuttered when she forced herself to meet my eyes. "I don't want to repeat my mistakes," she whispered. "You're not," I said. "You don't know that." "Then tell me." She closed her eyes, exhaling through her nose. Her voice came out low, almost broken. "I keep trying to convince myself that this is nothing, that I'm imagining all of it. But when I'm here, when I'm next to you, it feels like the part of me I buried years ago finally remembers how to breathe." My throat tightened. I'd felt it too. That quiet pull, that shift in the air whenever she walked in. But hearing her say it, not as confession, but as something she'd fought against, it hit deeper than I expected. "I don't want you to be a replacement," she said. "I don't want this to come from some place of loss." "It doesn't," I murmured. "Not for me." Her eyes opened, and she searched my face like she was afraid to find what she hoped for. "I know," she whispered, "and maybe that's why it scares me." The lights flickered again. The rain softened. We stood there, suspended in the kind of silence that doesn't demand an answer. It just waits for the truth to settle. She took a step closer. I didn't move back. Not touching, not speaking, just close enough that our breaths mixed. "I don't know what this is," she said, her voice barely more than air. "But I'm done pretending it's nothing." I felt her hand brush mine, slow, unsure, like she was giving me every chance to pull away. I didn't. Our fingers didn't lace. They didn't grip. They just rested against each other, warm and trembling, like two people learning how to touch again after years of forgetting. We stayed like that, standing in a dim shop at closing time, hands barely touching, breathing the same quiet, fragile air. No declarations, no promises, just honesty. Finally, she leaned her forehead lightly against mine, a small, exhausted surrender. "I'm not going anywhere tonight," she whispered. And for the first time, everything felt simple, quiet, right in the way only truth can be. We stayed exactly like that, two people who didn't have a name for what they were, but finally stopped running from it. Looking back now, it's almost strange how quiet the ending was. No fireworks, no dramatic final scene. Just two people sitting a little closer than before, breathing in the same moment as if it was something fragile. At the time, I didn't realize it was the beginning of something new. I just knew something inside me had unclenched, softened, and shifted. And for the first time in a long while, that didn't scare me. I think what surprised me most was how natural it felt. After everything, the missed signals, the hesitations, the questions I didn't know how to ask, we ended up exactly where we were meant to be. Not because fate pushed us, not because the world aligned, but because we finally stopped running from the truth sitting quietly between us. The days that followed weren't perfect. They were gentle, though, and that mattered more. Conversations felt easier. The silences became comfortable instead of heavy. I started noticing the way her smile came a little quicker, the way her shoulders didn't carry as much weight. And maybe she noticed the same in me. Maybe she saw that I wasn't holding myself at a distance anymore, that I wasn't afraid of being seen. There were moments when I caught her studying me, like she was memorizing something she didn't want to forget. And in those small glances, I realized how much had changed. Not just between us, but in who I was becoming. I didn't feel like someone waiting for the other shoe to drop. I didn't feel like someone bracing for disappointment. I just felt present, and that was new. The truth is, she didn't fix me. I didn't fix her either. That's not how this works. What we did was simpler. We made space. Space to feel, space to be honest, space to grow without pretending we already had everything figured out. Love didn't arrive as a declaration. It arrived in the soft afterglow of finally letting each other in. I started to understand that love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet shift, a hand lingering a little longer, an exhale you didn't know you were holding, a moment where you realize you're no longer walking alone. And once you feel that, really feel it, it stays with you. Even now, when I think about that night, the soft light, the quiet room, her shoulder brushing mine, I remember how still everything felt. Still but full, like the world had paused just long enough for us to catch up to ourselves. Long enough to understand that what we had wasn't an accident. And maybe that's the part that stays with me most. We chose this. Slowly, gently, imperfectly, we chose each other. Not with grand gestures, but with presence, with truth, with the quiet kind of care that lasts. So if this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?